other tile that it's in.
Yeah.
That's obviously just for the psychological effect.
Yeah.
The same principle applies when we're talking about panopticism.
Yeah, and guys, it's the same thing actually up here in Sweden. This is out in the public, so to speak, that many of the traffic cameras up here, to monitor people if they drive too fast and so forth, they can basically do a snapshot of your head and your license plate, and they automatically sends a bill to you, if you drive too fast or something like that. But anyway, a lot of these cameras that are up there are actually dummies basically, or empty shells just sitting there, the box, and again, and a lot of people know this, but they can't be sure about it. So you're definitely right. This is a theme that seems to be running, not only then in the U.S. but also up here in Northern Europe at least. And I wanted to squeeze in here before we continue. To me it's quite interesting that I've chosen these little black domes basically, but because in a sense it reflects kind of the like a black eye or an eye in the sky that actually is panoptic in a sense that it can go round and round. Do you agree on that, guys?
Yes, definitely. Basically, what we're dealing with here is a form of semiotic warfare, and semiotics is basically the use of signs, and basically the iconography that's associated with these surveillance programs already has a psychological effect upon the percipient. Already the percipient is beginning to get the impression that they're under the ubiquitous gaze of others. And really, again, it's all supposed to affect the human psyche on a very deep level. There in military installations, there's what's known as perceived capabilities and actual capabilities. Perceived capabilities is what the military hopes the enemy thinks are its capabilities, and then the actual capabilities are seldom proportionate with those perceived capabilities. So while you might see, several tanks and several machine guns and what have you, several soldiers, at one base, in actuality, they probably have far less staff, and maybe many of those machine guns aren't even loaded. Or the Soviet show parades where they would actually have rockets with dummy warheads.
That's right.
And spreading them out for public display. Absolutely. And this is what this is kind of where I differ to a certain extent, in my opinion, from the deceased philosopher Michel Foucault, who, by the way, wrote extensively about panopticism in his book Discipline and Punish. I would just recommend that book to people highly. Now, you do have to pry away some of Foucault's ideological propensities from his valid observations, given that he was a Marxist, was something of a proponent of historism and moral relativism. But that aside, he did make some worthwhile observations on panopticism. But at any rate, he contended that society had moved away from being a culture of spectacle, and that is where you had rules and regulations enforced through the overt spectacle of punishment. For instance, the guillotining of people, to a carceral culture where the rules and regulations are more more pervasively implied, more implicit in the conditions that are imposed. But to a certain extent, I'd have to disagree with Foucault in that I think we still live in a society of spectacle. The Cold War, again, as Paul mentioned, the Cold War kind of reinforces that contention, because there was always a show of force on both sides in the Hegelian dialectic in the West and in the East. With the Soviets, they were chronically showing off their supposed military might, and then here in the United States, we, for instance, we dropped the atomic bomb on both Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Indeed.
When many historians contend that was clearly not necessary.
Indeed.
But it was basically, many of the apologists for that decision have claimed that it was actually part of a deterrent to keep Joseph Stalin from moving westward and expansion in Europe. Yeah. So basically, you still have, though, a kind of a culture of spectacle, and the spectacle is part of this agenda of semiotic warfare, of placing the signs and the messages, the connotative meanings of those signs, embedding them directly into the psyche of the percipient, so as to really give one a perception of some notion of perceived capability, as opposed to the actual capabilities of those trying to engineer perception.
Yeah, and just let me run this by you. You know, the one of the latest, incarnations, as it were, of the surveillance cameras are the ones in the UK that actually have loudspeaker systems on them, so they are actually able to, basically shout at people walking by, dropping trash on the street or whatever. Even though I don't, agree that you're supposed to drop trash on the street, but that's beside the point. It's a form of, domestication, and you say this kind of implying, basically domesticating people and to create this mental, state of all the time being watched, and if you actually do something wrong, you're shouted at in public, and people, look upon you. It's very, it's very, like a zoo, that you guys referred to earlier. It's crazy.
Absolutely, yeah. That brings an even more insidious factor in when you're able to have a loudspeaker shout at a person and draw attention to that person. It brings in the shame factor. It brings in the guilt factor. And any system that is guilt based is simply about manipulation, and it's not about improvement of the self improvement or anything of that sort. Guilt based systems like that are simply about control.
Yeah, and at this point they use it for what they legitimize as a kind of a moral issue, whatever. But this could easily turn, as different political parties, whatever interests, take over countries or nations or regions, so forth. And you could easily have, these systems in place, being used for other purposes. And as soon as the moral, values change politically, these are the ones that are going to be, pressed or stressed, with the help of these systems that are in place, basically.
Yes. The moral, any kind of real moral value to it will